Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BikuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God ranking video. Last time I placed all of my favorite Lost Halls items from least to greatest, and now today I'm gonna go for a bit of a broader topic. Class abilities, specifically untiered class abilities. I'm gonna go down the line from my least favorite to my most favorite, give a brief description and explain why I like the item, and we'll be on our way. This is a hefty amount more than last time. I'm not necessarily looking for the best items around, but like before, that will still be a factor. But I'm looking for those items that really deserve to be untiered. They don't have to be broken or perfectly balanced, but maybe they're a bit strange or have this weird quirk to them. That doesn't necessarily make you want to use it all the time, but makes you tilt your head and think about it. Let's take it from the top. Or the bottom, I guess, whatever. Number 38. The Honey Scepter. Thought this item was going to be pretty awesome when I first saw it, and then I read it. It does have a significant amount more targets than the regular tiered scepters, but the damage is so low that I don't really think it justifies it. Since it has honey in the name, I thought they were going to make it do something with slowing, but I guess that would have been too similar to Foamy, so they just opted for not having a status effect. Number 37, the Cracked Crystal Skull falls under the same problem of being a low tier UT item. It's good early on, but eventually you do come across a better tiered item. In this case, the Radius is actually the highest of any other skull, which is pretty cool, but the damage and heal is just so low that even a tier 3 is a better option for you. I like the sprite though, it's a very mystical shade of pink. Number 36, the Orb of Sweet Demise. An actually half decent item considering it drops from the same dungeon as the Honey Scepter. It stasises and slows enemies at the same time, with a slow duration being 5 seconds and the stasis duration 3. However, 3 of those 5 slow seconds will be used up while the enemy is stasised. So it's really more like a 2-second slow, unless the enemy that you're hitting, like a lot of dungeon bosses, is immune to stasis. Then you get the whole 5 seconds, which is one of the longest slows in the game. But I don't play Mystic all that much, so that is a problem. Number 35, Snakeskin Shield. Really the main reason why this item is above the last 3 is because it's a shield. You get a 3-second stun, decent damage a little bit above tier 4, and an additional 3 speed unique to the snakeskin. It gets outclassed by the time you get to tier 5, but for what it's worth, dropping from the snake pit and a purple bag, it's not half bad. Number 34, the Enchantment Orb. Took me a second to realize what this thing actually did. The initial stasis effect is actually applied around you, the player, not where you point. Instead, Curse is applied to all enemies around your cursor. Again, I don't play Mystic very often, but for those who do, this does actually look pretty fun, especially for rushing. Number 33, Plague Poison. I actually just got my first one of these not too long ago, and while that was pretty exciting, gotta say, haven't used it once. Part of that can be chalked up to me running mainly Lost Halls recently, and so the assassin has been placed on the bench. But Plague Poison overall has always been a pretty situational item. Throw it in Dirty Tombs so that you can hit all of them at once. And I hear you can damage the Killer Bee Queen at a safe distance, and that's something I gotta try. But the biggest thing about the Plague is that it has very small damage over a longer duration than your typical poison, in exchange for a much larger area of effect. So it's more of a crowd control item. It's a fun item to mess around with, but doesn't really have a shining scenario. Number 32, Ghostly Prism. While teleportation is still very possible, thankfully, in exchange for a decoy, you drop bombs instead. It's not exactly the easiest thing to time in the heat of battle, but when you can land a few, it's pretty fun. Number 31, the Tablet of the King's Avatar. One of the coolest looking UTs out there, very ancient, looks like it has a lot of history and wisdom within it, but it's a very situational item. You get more MP, which is pretty sweet, but the MP cost has also gone up, nearly doubled, and the damage of each shot has been reduced in exchange for the ability to pierce through enemies, which is cool initially, but the wizard is already really good at crowd control with its really high long-range DPS, so this item does come off as a tad useless for me. Number 30. The Tome of Pain. The Parasite Chambers is home to quite the variety of items now, the Tome of Pain being a very fascinating deviation. While it still gives a very low party heal, the dynamic here is that you damage enemies around you as well. You also lose health and vitality, but gain attack, speed, and defense. The idea of a tome damaging is pretty interesting, I'll give it that. And it is nice to have the priest get a buff to its DPS, but it is a little bit awkward needing to get so close to enemies in order to damage them. Like the tablet, I think that it's a fun item to mess around with, more useful than the tablet, I'd say. But in a scenario where I actually need to heal myself because, you know, I'm a priest, I would definitely use something else. Number 29, Spiteful Scutum. When this item dropped, I was super hyped for it. And it's still really good, just a different type of shield. You have a 4-second stun with a 1.5-second delay. The damage is a lot lower and the range is lower. So it's not about running up to an enemy and spamming the stun necessarily, although ironically, it does give you the capabilities to chain stun by yourself if you time it right. However, a lot of the time for me, me personally, a big perk to the shield isn't just being able to stun enemies, which of course is useful, but it's also the knight's main source of DPS. He doesn't have a damage buff of any kind, so the shield is how he gets his damage. To reduce that does reduce my chances of getting loot, but I understand that that is a bit of a nitpick. It's still a really solid item that I would love to get my hands on. Number 28, Trap of the Vile Spirit. Easily one of the best traps in the game, arguably the best. It takes away the status affliction for higher, faster damage, which unfortunately kind of undermines the assassin class, because this trap is essentially a big instant poison, but it is cool to see this kind of raw spin on the Huntress's burst damage. Number 27, Quiver of the Shadows. Like I said in my last video, this is an extremely high damage quiver, assuming you can land all of your shots, which isn't exactly possible at long range. But for low level farming, it's extremely useful. The only downside is that, like the Vile Spirit, you don't get any status effect of any kind, which kind of takes away the unique flavor that the bow classes had, so it's not necessarily my go-to. Number 26, Prism of Dire Instability. I might be a little biased towards this one because, well, it's the only UT Prism that I have, but this Prism sacrifices teleportation in exchange for an explosive decoy. The decoy is really hard to land, but when it hits, it does a lot of damage, and the 2-attack whiz and 40 MP is nice. It's especially good on bosses that try to charge and jump on you, like the Jade and Garnet statues for the Mountain Temple. Number 25, Prism of Dancing Swords. Like Dire Instability, we're sacrificing our teleportation in exchange for a decoy buff. In this case, we have 2 decoys. They go off in opposite directions and are great for confusing crowds. I can see this helping in rushing, or really just any scenario where there are a lot of enemies around you, especially if you don't want to accidentally teleport on top of an enemy, and that neon rainbowish tint is very mesmerizing. Number 24, Cloak of Bloody Surprises. Gotta say, it's probably that shade of red that's luring me in, because as a cloak, it's kind of weird. While you're invisible, you're also being slowed in exchange for a damage buff, implying that this is going to be used on bosses, not rushing. So in ways, it's the complete opposite of a cloak, which also makes it the perfect complement to a cloak. Use a plain walker or ghostly concealment for the rest of the dungeon, and then whenever you get to the boss, switch to this one. But unfortunately, it is an event white, so who knows when I'll ever get one. Number 23, Skull of Endless Torment. Gonna be honest, did not think very highly of this item the first time I read it, but then I realized the error of my ways, and finally understood that it is a very concentrated skull. Unlike the cracked crystal skull, it has the smallest area of effect of any skull, but higher damage and less MP cost than Bloodsucker. Not to mention 40 HP, 3 defense, and 3 dex are very incentivizing stats. You're just not going to be getting a very good heal off of clusters of enemies if that's what you're looking for. But seeing as how I can often use my skull as a necro spell bomb of sorts, I don't really see that being a big problem for me. Number 22, Tome of Purification. I finally got one last year, and I still forget to put it on my priest. Aside from having the same MP cost as Prot, as well as a very nice 7 Wisdom for Wismod and 7 Vitality, as well as having nearly identical healing powers to the Prot and Tome of Holy Guidance, the major perk of Puri is that it removes all negative status effects. Pet stasis, slow, blind, paralyze, you name it. Use this ability, it's gone on an instant. Well, except for quiet. Number 21, Recurring Terror Spell. Genuinely have no idea how this item even works. I know it's got this really weird shot pattern. The shots fly around in this convoluted arc until they reach their destination. Really strange, but really cool. The shots themselves also have higher damage than tier 6, but the total damage is a lot less. So kind of like the tablet, it is a crowd control item, only it's much cooler and more effective, so yeah. Number 20, Cloak of the Planewalker. One of the first few white bags I'm sure any of us have gotten. Cloak of the Planewalker is a very simple but very effective item that every rogue needs. In addition to invisibility, you can teleport to your cursor's location just like a trickster. And I think it goes without saying why that's a useful ability to have at your command. Number 19, Coral Venom Trap. While Vile Spirit is very powerful, Coral Venom Trap still does a pretty significant amount of damage, has some nice stat bonuses, and above all, it paralyzes all the affected targets. And Paralyze, I feel, is one of the most useful status effects any class can have. Number 18, Nidaria Rod. I may be a little biased towards this since it just came out, and Scepters are proving to be one of my favorite abilities. The Rod is an item that gets more powerful the more targets that you hit. It starts out about half the damage of T6, but with every target that you hit, it goes up a significant amount. It's one of those things where you don't really notice it in battle too much because it's a lot of mathematics and, well, we're playing a video game, there's no time for that. But if you do have the time to set up the kill in your head, I can see this being pretty useful. But even if you don't do that, it's still a decent scepter in general. Number 17, Marble Seal. Some may argue that this item is so situational that it's not even useful, and I can see that, but still really cool. Plop down a marble eye right in front of you, everybody around you gets armoring and damaging. It's like you're setting up camp in this one spot, refusing to budge from the enemy, have everybody unite, use their power to attack the enemy in front of you. But yes, it does have a very high mana cost, and the fact that you have to stay in one spot, and you're not getting any healing, does make this inferior to the T6. Number 16, Tome of Holy Protection. Prot versus Puri is a common debate I've heard in the past. Fact of the matter is, pets have made me a rather reckless player in the last couple of years, so the fact that the Prot acts as a jug for priests is right up my alley. And the fact that the healing is on par with T6, it only sweetens the deal for me. Number 15, Skullish Remains of Esben. It's a skull that can slow. Need I say any more? It's got decent range and healing plus good damage, making it a pretty good pick for a main skull. Number 14, Orb of Aether. Here's an item I just want to try. It places a mystical trap of sorts on the ground that, instead of stasising, slows and paralyzes all targets that walk within the area. You do have to wait for the first one to disappear if you want to throw out another one, so they can't be stacked, but as it says on the wiki notes, this is an incredibly unique orb, and it's definitely got my interest. Number 13, Murky Toxin. Here's an item that actually makes the assassin pretty cool. It's a very small area of effect, but if you can land both shots right on top of the enemy, you can deal some pretty significant damage. And the offensive stats are a good bonus. It's not a broken item by any means, but it's a solid one for a class that really needs it. Number 12, Beehemoth Quiver. While it is a tad less MP efficient, and it will be hard to get all of the shots in like the Quiver of the Shadows, you're getting 3 attack and dexterity, solid damage overall, and 5 seconds of slow. Not only is this great for every enemy that you encounter, making the targets far easier to hit, but anything that happens to be immune to paralyze, this now becomes the Quiver of choice. I just wish it didn't drop from that terrifying event. Number 11, Bottled Medusozoan. The other newly released UT item from the Nidarian Reef. This isn't actually a poison. It costs the same as the Murky Toxin, but it summons a small stationary Nidarian that releases AoE bursts, totaling at 1800 damage over 3 seconds, with a pretty decent radius as well. While it's true that you aren't inflicting poison on enemies, so anyone who walks out of the radius will no longer be damaged, the fact that it happens so quickly reduces that probability, making this a very, very good item for the assassin. Number 10, Orb of Conflict. Now this is a classic item. When UT Weekend came so many years ago, this was one of the items that I had on my list, but simply didn't have the funds to purchase. The orb does not inflict curse like the other ones, but it still stasises for a good duration, but also gives you speedy and damaging to yourself, which is good considering the Mystic was always the weaker of the staffed classes. Number 9, Scepter of Devastation. While you only get about 3 targets at max, the first target that you hit, you can deal around 1000 damage to, making this an auto-homing spell bomb of sorts for the sorcerer. And not even just on bosses, messing around in Godlands is so much fun. It's like you have a magnetic doombow, but you're playing sorcerer, and it's still only 85 mana. Truly a worthy and powerful scepter. Number 8, Scepter of Fulmination. While I love Devastation, Fulmi is still the winner for me. You're still getting a nice +2 attack and whiz, and a decent amount of targets with good damage, but all enemies become slowed for 3 seconds. I guess originally it was going to daze enemies, but they thought it would be too good, but slowing is still really effective, as I'm sure you could tell from what I've already said in this video. Not to mention a low 70 MP cost allows this item to be spammed rather frequently. Maybe if I were to get my hands on these 2 items again in the future, I could compare them truly and find out which one I prefer, but for now, that's how it is. Number 7, Kageboshi. Yeah, surprisingly, I actually have really come around on this item. For one, love the sprite work. Very nice illuminating shade of purple, and a cool shape that deviates from the traditional ninja star that we're used to. The 2 defense and 5 vitality is also a good compensator for the ninja's lowest stats. I imagine this being a good combo with the armor of Nil. The biggest trade-off here is that we have 20 less MP than Doom Circle, while also sacrificing about half the damage for the ability to pierce. Honestly, it's not the best trade-off in the world, and being able to pierce isn't the coolest thing, but it does shine in those moments where there are a lot of enemies surrounding a boss. It's far from an exceptional item, and not nearly as good as I would like it to be, but it's not bad all things considered. I just, really like ninja, so. Number 6, Quiver of Thunder. This was an awe-inspiring item back in the day. You never heard anybody getting these as a drop, and while I don't think that the item is as good as its rarity may suggest, it's still really good on its own. +5 attack for an archer with Doombow is insane. The damage is also higher than a tier 6, and it dazes enemies for 4 seconds, a status effect that not many items in the game have. So when you see a boss suddenly have their shots cut in half, you know somebody's got a quad. And that is a very special feeling. The only main drawback to it is that it can't be spammed. I guess they really don't want us chain dazing bosses. Number 5. Skull of Corrupted Souls. I've already gushed about this item plenty in my previous videos. Really, I'm just a sucker for the sprite. It's not an amazing item, and I love the idea of the Necro being able to curse and increase his DPS. It's more cool than it is good, but I still really want one. Number 4. Seal of Blasphemous Prayer, otherwise known as Oreo. While the seal may give a lower duration of healing and damaging, plus no maximum HP buff, Oreo is the only item in the game to give 1.8 seconds of invulnerability. Want to go sit on that boss that would kill any player? Well, now you can, for a little less than 2 seconds, so please do it quickly, but it's a very empowering item. I don't use it a whole lot since I don't really like to risk my characters in a permadeath game, but it's a very humbling item to have in your possession. Number 3. Midnight Star. Unlike the Kageboshi, which I want to like more, I think Midnight Star is perfect the way that it is. Bit too rare for my taste, but then again I don't run LODs, so I can't complain. Reasonable 90 MP cost, decent damage at 450 average, but 4 seconds of Paralyze. The longest Paralyze in the game. And that dark shade of blue really reflects the midnight theming perfectly. Number 2. Helm of the Juggernaut. Is there no more highly sought after item in the game? The Jug is so rare and so powerful it has become its own meme. It's something that you say you're gonna get on your way to a Sphinx or Hermit, because you know it's not going to happen, but you really want it to. And honestly, while I think most event whites are a little too rare, Helm of the Juggernaut is one of the few that sort of justifies it. You're still getting your DPS buff, albeit for a shorter duration, and in exchange for your speedy bonus, you get double your armor. And this was always a really cool dynamic for me when I was starting out, because the Paladin, while technically weaker, has the more powerful UT, because you can go invulnerable and not take any damage, whereas the Warrior has higher DPS, but an armoring effect that still allows you to take damage. However, because it's 4.5 seconds, it immediately is more useful than Oreo, sadly. And compared to the other helmets, this sprite design is insane. I don't know how that's gonna fit on anyone's head. Number 1. My favorite UT item in the game. I've said it before in some of my videos, but for those who don't know, Shield of Ogmer. It was not even a contest in my mind. This has always been the most legendary item to me. This was the item that I used to see on Night players and would feel completely bewildered by it. That astonishing gold trim, filled in by a steel core, with remarkably good shading considering its pixel graphics, in addition to the item itself being extremely good. The highest max damage of any shield, a health bonus, higher defense than T6, and an armor breaking effect for 4 seconds. When you see somebody using an Ogmer, you tip your hat to them. To me, it's simply amazing. So those are my favorite UT abilities, all ranked from least to greatest. Anyway, my voice is getting hoarse, so I'm gonna call it a day there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what your favorite UT item is down below. And as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright, see ya.